Let's try this example problem. Suppose you have this thing, build a truth table for P or Q implies P and Q. And because this is a complicated one, to build a truth table, you don't want to just have P, Q, and all this. You really want to figure these out separately so that using these two, you can figure out the truth table. It's a good strategy to make columns as you need. So write down all the possible ways that you can have true and false for P and Q. Of course, P or Q is true when any one of these are true. So it's T, 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 and then only when this is both are at F, you get F, and then over here, P and Q is true only when both are true. So this is what you get. And therefore, this will be the data, and you have to see whether T implies T is true, T implies F, T implies F, F implies F. So that's what you need to figure out. But we know that this if-then statement is false only when the premise is true and the conclusion is false. That's the only time this is false, right? So these two are the cases when it should be giving you false. On the other hand, these two are both true. See, if the premise is false, then we don't care about the conclusion. It's always true. Okay? So this is what you get as the answer, right? Any questions? Right. Okay, second example. For this one, we have three variables that can be true or false. So you need to think about all the possible combinations of true and false. And in addition, because you need to know this in order to think about the truth value for P implies this, you also want to build Q implies R as a separate column. And then you have P implies Q implies R as the fourth column. Okay. So one way to figure out all the possibilities of PQR is to kind of use all of these, but for each one of these pairs, R could be true or false, right? So that's one way to do this. Just write this twice, but then for R, make it true, false. Okay, true, false, and then write this twice, and then write true, false. And then write FT twice, write true, false. Then FF twice, write true, false. Okay, so that's all the possible combinations of PQR. Okay, and let's look at Q implies R. Because you have implies thingy, this evaluates to false only when Q is true and R is false, right? So here's one, here's another one, and I think that's it. That's the only time you're going to have a false. So true, false, and then the other ones are true, false, true, true. And now for this last implication, it's this implies this, right? So again, you have to look for TF. There's one TF. This is going to be false. Do I see another TF? Oh, it's all left, so there's nothing else. Okay. So this is the only time you get false, and all the other cases you have true. Now this last one's a bit interesting because what I wrote there looks very similar to this, but if you try to build the truth table for this one, you'll see that this has a different value for that one. So you can show that these two, although they look very similar, they mean different things. Okay. So this is saying if P implies Q is true, then R is true. That's what this is saying. Whereas it's this one saying if P is true, then Q implies R is true. It's a bit of a different flavor. Well, since we already talked about this, let's try to do this one anyways. Let's think about what P implies Q implies R is like. So for this one, we need to build the column for P implies Q. And then using that, we need P implies Q implies R. P implies Q, well, again, you just have to watch out for TF, because these are the two places that's going to give you F. Otherwise, it's all true. Okay, and then now it's this implies R, and so it's this implying R. So you just have to look for when this is true and this is false. So T implies false, that's going to be false. Okay, and then here T implies T, that's good. T implies false, that's going to be false. And T implies false, that's going to be false. So these are the cases where this is going to value to false, all the other ones will be true. And as you can see, these two have different values, especially at these two places, right? Because they evaluate to different values, we can see that those two things are not the same.